Capital punishment. The state-sponsored killing of prison inmates is the ultimate, irreversible punishment for their crimes. Since the resumption of its implementation in 1982, the state of Texas has executed 560 people. Last year, Texas accounted for more than half of all executions nationwide. To date, in 2019, Texas is responsible for the deaths of 2/3 of all prison inmates, with more scheduled to occur throughout the year. The executions are assured through the use of a lethal injection of a respiratory depressant and paralytic, meaning the inmates suffocate and are helpless, as the primary right of human life, the right to live, is taken from them. As the national leader of this barbaric practice, the state of Texas sets a standard for the country. Texas needs to cease its implementation of the inhumane riddance of human, albeit criminal, lives. Charles Brooks Jr. was the first person to be executed by lethal injection on December 7th, 1982 in Huntsville, Texas.
And he was the first to die by lethal injection, and I felt like I was in a dream world. I go, this can't be happening. This really cannot be happening. God, wake me up. And so it did happen, and we went to, after we were in this little room at the prison, and it was people with signs hollering, kill him, kill him. It was one lady that I noticed, though. I'll never forget this lady. She was a white lady, and she had on no shoes, and it was cold because it was in December, and she was just screaming and hollering, don't kill him, please don't do this. And then she just disappeared out of the, I didn't see her anymore. I don't know where that lady went, but I'll always remember her. She was very devastated at the time. We went to the funeral home. They didn't want no one to come in at that time. I guess they were waiting on the family, and so me and my two boys, Derek and Keith, went. My two younger kids were so young to where I didn't put them through that trauma. They stayed with family members and what have you. But they went to the funeral and all that.
On December 14, 1976, Charles Brooks went to a used car dealership and asked if he could test the car. The mechanic working that day was a man named David Gregory, who accompanied Brooks on his test drive. During the test drive, Brooks picked up his partner, a man named Woody Ludris. Soon after, they threw the mechanic in the trunk of the car and took him to a motel, where they would later bound Gregory to a chair, gag him, and ultimately kill him.
I tell you what devastated me. I seen a girl that lived out there in the area with him. She said she had seen this program to where they were talking about lethal injection. And this man said he believes that they're burying those people alive because they just deadening their heart, they just deadening this, they just deadening that. Who knows when it wear off, they're going to be completely dead or not. And so that just, oh man, that frightened me. So that just made me think, how scratching, trying to get out, all that is trauma. It really was a trauma, and I hated it for my children so bad.
And when we went in, I guess the jailer said that, okay, this is as far as you're going. Your father has requested that y'all do not see his execution. Specifically, I do not want my sons, I do not want my son to see my execution. So we didn't see it, but we got there like 10 minutes early. The execution was scheduled for, let's say, midnight. We got there at 10 minutes to midnight. So we're just sitting in the room talking. Then we see some reporters come in. We see some more people, witnesses come in. They go in the room, and then we're looking at our watches. It's 5 minutes till, it's 3 minutes till, it's 1 minute till. Now it's like 5 minutes after. And we're thinking, they must have did it. It's like dead silence. Nobody's saying anything. And then all these witnesses that came in, they came out, and they had their heads down, looking all sad, and then we knew. It was done, it was over with, but we didn't get to see him. So we just left and went back to the hotel room, and instead of sadness at first, it felt more like shock. We were just like, did they really do that? Is Dad really dead? Is it done? Is it gone? And it was.
After Brooks and Ludris were both convicted of the crime, neither of them would confess who fired the shot that ended the life of David Gregory. Just after midnight, Brooks was injected with a lethal barbiturate compound, a drug that causes unconsciousness and respiratory depression, At 12:16 a.m., Brooks was pronounced dead. Why were both of these men convicted of the same crime, but only one of them was given the death penalty? What if Charles Brooks wasn't the one who pulled the trigger?
Friday night in Corpus Christi, Texas, 8:05 p.m., and a call comes into 911.
I have a suspect with a knife at the store.
It's Wanda Lopez, a 24-year-old single mom working as a cashier at a roadside gas station, and she's worried. Minutes later, Wanda Lopez calls 911 again.
You want it? I'll give it to you. I'm not going to do nothing to you.
2602 South Padre, got an armed robbery going down right now. Get out of it.
But now this killing from 30 years ago is raising the most provocative question. Does the death penalty in our country always punish the guilty, or are mistakes made? Is it possible our system has killed an innocent man? Carlos de Luna.
In 1989, a Hispanic man named Carlos de Luna was put to death for the stabbing of a convenience store clerk named Wanda Lopez. She was stabbed in the chest with a lock blade buck knife. Throughout his entire trial, he pleaded that he was innocent and even told prosecutors that he was not the one who committed the crime. He stated that he knew who the culprit was, a man named Carlos Hernandez. But how did the court rule Hernandez as a phantom who simply did not exist, just a figure of de Luna's imagination? 4 years after his execution, the professor Lieberman hired a private investigator for just one day. And at the end of that single day, he dug up uncovered evidence that eluded scores of Texas prosecutors, defense lawyers, and police officers between de Luna's execution and his arrest, showing that Carlos Hernandez was no phantom. The investigators started to put together all the evidence piece by piece until they put together and had found out that he had a violent criminal past and was the one who was always known to carry a lock blade buck knife.
Police find 21-year-old Carlos de Luna a few blocks away, hiding underneath a truck. He's brought back to the scene of the crime, where an eyewitness positively IDs him. Even though there are no fingerprints, no physical evidence linking him to the scene, he becomes the lone suspect.
These incidents are absolute tragedies and are just a select few from the many such events that have come to pass over the years. Ruben Cantu and Claude Jones are two other confirmed wrongful executions carried out by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Many other cases are suspected of wrongfully being executed.
The inhumanity of lethal injection, because what he was most moved by in his witness is exactly the same experience I had last night when I witnessed Eric Neno's execution, the first execution I've ever watched, and that was how horrific the moment was, how horrible that 10-minute period is, however long it takes for us to kill him, how horrible it was because it was so antiseptic, because it was so sterile, because it was so quiet, because it was so inhumane. The humanity of life was absent in that execution chamber. It was absent in the witness chamber where that I stood. It was absent from everything I could discern in the witness chamber that was beside me. There was silence, virtual silence throughout the whole process.
We decided to interview a woman named Tanya Sanchez. We interviewed her because she personally witnessed a man get murdered by lethal injection in the state of Florida. In our interview, we asked her personal opinion and how this affected her life in the future. Can you give me a brief summary of this event? Like, just tell me about what happened.
Well, it was probably almost 30 years ago. I lived in Miami, Florida at the time, and two of my friends were involved in a actual serial killer attack in the University of Florida in Gainesville. Tracy Hollis was a girl that I grew up with, went to elementary school, middle school, high school, played sports with her. Manny, which is the only boy that died, because it was 4 girls and 1 boy. I knew him in high school. Again, they were part of a serial killing of 5 college students in the University of Florida.
All right. And when this event occurred, how did this make you feel?
Well, of course, when there was 2 girls that were found killed and mutilated, and of course, that just sparked, a lot of fear. At the time I was going to college in South Florida, and it put fear in me to be more aware of my surroundings and so forth. So yeah, for a while, for months, because that spree I think went on for maybe over a month, those killings. So yeah, it was pretty scary.
And do you know if the murderer was killed by lethal injection?
Yes, he was killed by lethal injection back in 2007 in Tallahassee, Florida.
Did you witness the lethal injection?
Yes, I did.
And that must have been pretty hard on you.
Yes, it was not something you want to be. It's not something you go around telling people that you've been privy to watch. It's not something that made me feel good, put it that way.
Do you think that seeing this event affected you in the long term or in the long run?
Yeah, I definitely think it did. I don't believe an eye for an eye, and basically, yeah, he was in jail. He was convicted of all those 5 murders. I just think he should have sat in jail and rotted there the rest of his life. I don't think he should have been punished by lethal injection.
Are you aware that innocent people are killed on death row?
Yes, I am aware of that.
How does that make you feel?
I am against it. I like I said, I don't feel that those people should be punished by death. If they kill someone, an eye for an eye, I don't believe that.
What is your opinion on capital punishment?
Well, I'm against capital punishment. I believe that someone should pay for their crimes, of course, but I believe in them sitting in a cell for the rest of their lives and, thinking about what they did and just living out the rest of their life like that.
There's one other execution that I see very vividly, and honestly, I do not remember the man's name. I can picture his face very clearly, and why it's really stuck with me is that there were no witnesses. There were no witnesses for the victim's family. There were no witnesses for the inmate's family. He was there completely alone. And when the warden came in and said, "Do you have a last statement?" he never looked to the side, just kept looking at the ceiling, and he shook his head no. And as the chemicals began to take effect, you just saw this one tear run down his cheek, and it really stuck with me because it was just such a sad, lonely scene.
This is the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas, the headquarters of the state's prison system. Death row inmates are brought to this unit where they spend their final hours. And for years, Michelle Lyons and Larry Fitzgerald watched the final moments of those inmates' lives. In total, Larry Fitzgerald witnessed 219 executions. Michelle Lyons says she witnessed about 280 executions. By the end of the year, the state of Texas had reached a grim milestone: 40 executions, the highest number in the country. Almost 4 times more than Oklahoma, the state with the second highest number of executions that same year.
In 2000, that was the most executions that have ever been carried out in Texas.
What was your experience of it?
Back then, especially when I was just starting and covering those 40 during that year, I did not feel any conflict at all. I mean, to me, this was my job. My job was to be an unbiased reporter and be down the middle, and I didn't let it impact me whatsoever.
One of the inmates executed that year was Gary Graham, a man who maintained his innocence until the end.
Graham was convicted of a murder where there was no physical evidence, no murder weapon, and only one eyewitness.
But Michelle's reporter instincts were at times challenged. While witnessing the execution of Ricky McGinn, what stuck with her was not the image of a man strapped to a gurney who'd been convicted of raping and murdering his 12-year-old stepdaughter, but the image of a woman on the other side of the glass, McGinn's mother.
She was very elderly at the time and was in a wheelchair, and she was wearing this floral dress and her pearls, and it just tore me up because she insisted that she be standing up so that he could see her through the glass. And That's one of the executions I can so vividly picture. It's not him that I picture, it's her. I picture her hands and how wrinkled and they were against the glass so that she could make sure that her son could see her.
Michelle told me the transition gave her a new perspective, which evolved when she became a mother in 2005.
Up until that point, I had always really sympathized with the victim's family because here they've had something they love taken from them. They're witnessing this execution. After having a child of my own, I really started to empathize with the inmate's family as well and realize, that they're watching their loved one die. You have a mother who is watching her son go to sleep forever. And I started to have a much harder time with it.
Cameron Todd Willingham was put to death by lethal injection by the state of Texas on February 17, 2004. They said he set the fire that killed his 3 little daughters in Corsicana, Texas, 2 days before Christmas in 1991, a fire he escaped from.
There's smoke damage in this room. There's some heat damage in this room.
Here, in a video taken a few days after that fire, investigators walked through the house, trying to figure out what happened.
This is the bed where the 2-year-old was found in the middle of the bed.
They looked for clues they thought the fire left behind, and those clues, they decided, meant only one thing. The fire was deliberately set, and Todd Willingham was the man who set it. Doug Fogg was one of those arson investigators.
You remain very confident.
Oh, yeah.
That this was arson.
Totally.
But that conclusion is now widely acknowledged by top fire investigators and scientists throughout the country to be deeply flawed.
Do you believe that the state of Texas executed an innocent man?
I do.
David Gran is a reporter for The New Yorker magazine. His recent story showed in damning detail that the investigative techniques used to send Todd Willingham to his death have now been discredited by modern science.
This fire has now been examined multiple times by separate of the leading fire investigators in the country. Each one has concluded that there is absolutely no evidence of arson or that a crime ever occurred.
A man like Todd. Todd Willingham was certainly a man from the wrong side of the tracks, a man with a criminal record, mostly drug offenses and a robbery. His wife Stacy said Todd had beaten her, including when she was pregnant. To the prosecutor, that history of spousal abuse was key. Todd's wife Stacy insisted her husband, while violent towards her, would never have hurt their children. Stacy declined our request for an interview through a family member.
We don't execute people who beat their wives. And the only question that matters in this case is, did Cameron Todd Willingham set a fire on December 23rd, 1991 that burned down his house and killed his 3 children?
Since the Willingham fire in 1991, there has been a revolution in the scientific understanding and analysis of fires. Gerald Hurst is one of the pioneers of that revolution and one of the many leading modern fire analysts who have looked at the Willingham case.
This is just a typical fire.
Typical fire, yes.
He was executed for arson for the murder of his daughters.
That's right, he was, because the people who investigated the fire did not understand the behavior of fire.
Expert Gerald Hurst said there is nothing to suggest to any reasonable arson investigator that this was an arson fire. It was just a fire. Investigators had no scientific evidence determining that the fire was intentional or accidental. A few years later, in 2010, the court ruled that the state of Texas wrongfully executed Cameron Todd Willingham. Wrongful execution should not be a possibility. The destruction of human life is a travesty in and of itself, nevertheless, when it comes unnecessarily.
I run to the front and out the door, and that's when I seen Todd at his front door, and he started screaming, "My babies, oh my babies are burning."
Their neighbor, 23-year-old Cameron Todd Willingham, was in the house with his 3 children when the fire started. All 3 children, Amber, Carmen, and Cameron, were dead.
The little girl was crying, "Daddy, Daddy." When I woke up, the whole house was in smoke.
Texas leads the nation in the taking of criminal lives, and needlessly so. Incarceration, especially for life, is a much greater punishment than quick, albeit cruel, deprivation of the right to live. And even beyond the convicted and executed, the death penalty has a tremendous adverse effect on the lives of those they love. This wholly inhumane practice needs to stop, and the fight begins with a call to your local representatives.